Hey, good morning. This is Russ, and I have with us Finn Beasley from the Cateran Society, who's going to tell us a little bit about himself and why we're all wrong, and we should also think basket hilt swords are really cool too. And as I asked before, do you have any knowledge of the whereabouts of Jack Burton?
I don't even know if I know what that reference is.
I'm just proving how old I am. That's all. All right, go
Okay.
ahead. Tell us about yourself and what you do.
All right. I'm a fencer, a broadsword fencer with the Cateran Society, uh, which is an online learning program for Scottish basket hilt broadsword. It's a really accessible program. Anyone can join. It's free. My it's got people all over the world. My mentor is in Germany. Um, what else do you want to know?
Well, I want to know why this is cooler than Hutton and what you do about it and what makes it awesome. And
All right. I think it is a super cool system because it's very simple, but within that simple system is a lot of tactical complexity, and it's a very defensive system, so it's good at keeping yourself safe.
mhm.
Uh, some aspects of it remind me a little of longsword, where you can defend and attack at the same time. Uh, some of the some of my favorite parts of it are blade actions, where I feel like with saber, there's certain blade actions that work, but with the straight sword, it sort of opens up a whole new level of control. A lot of people fence saber with sort of open, at least in my experience, I don't know how it is elsewhere, with sort of open invitations instead of closing the line and binding on the other person's sword. Whereas the Cateran system and the a lot of the manuals it comes from really focus on closing the line. So you want to like have your guard to the side you're guarding, and then you use your blade through the middle to get into contact with your opponent's sword. Um, and that gives you a lot of information that you can't get otherwise if you have a refused guard. There we go. Focus. Um, what else? So some of those blade actions that I really like are the glazade, which is kind of like a glide cut in Italian saber. Um, but let's see, the timing of the cut in broadsword is a little strange because you're not leading with the tip. You kind of want to lead with the basket and then throw the tip out once you have gotten contact and control of your opponent's sword. Uh, and especially with that like crossed engagement that the system advocates, you can you can blast right through that bind and sort of hit them in the head at the same time as you have total control of the opponent's sword.
Very cool. That is a technique that my system occasionally will do. We're extremely bind heavy and less focused on invitations. Is that something where you've noticed a strong difference between a curve and a straight blade, for example, like if you're using a turkale, or is it just a system emphasis rather than a mechanical one?
I haven't played around with the turkale specifically. I do have sabers, and I started with Italian saber about 5 years ago. So it's a later system. I don't know if the earlier military saber systems are as focused on invitations instead of binds. But I really like it. My problem with invitations is that you don't get any uh, information as to what's going on with your opponent's blade. You sort of have to use your eyes instead of your sense of feeling, and your eyes are like just a little bit slower than your sense of touch.
Cool. So, what sources does the Cateran Society draw from in order to put this together?
The level that I'm on, which is regimental style broadsword, uses George Sinclair, Henry Angelo, um, Charles Roworth, John Taylor, and Thomas Mathewson.
Sweet. So what's
So
neat about them?
I haven't delved specifically into the sources themselves, like individually yet. I've mostly been following the Cateran curriculum. So I couldn't tell you specifically per source. Why is my camera so? Sorry, I'm having focus issues here.
I notice it doesn't like when you lean back for some reason. It thinks you're your printer.
Yeah, so I couldn't tell you specifically per source. I'd like to get more into that once I'm finished with this level of the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think the system really synthesizes kind of the best features of the different sources.
How so?
Let's see. Again, because I haven't read them specifically, I'm not exactly sure, but the curriculum is definitely designed to work together really well and have specific sections that kind of clearly show one type of action. Like you start off with basic fencing, which is focusing on parry riposte and getting really good at just the parry riposte game. And then you slowly add in each additional kind of action. So then it would be maybe feints, and you get good at that, and then you add in double and triple attacks. And so it's a nice kind of framework to build from that basic fencing foundation. And eventually you get into cool stuff like blade actions and closing in and pushing your opponent around.
So I love blade actions. I love them a lot. Whether I'm good at them is not up for debate because I'm not. But that being said, right, I think blade actions are really sexy because I found that a lot of people will let you touch their blade. And I was taught by a mutual acquaintance of ours, John, that if you let people touch your blade, bad things can happen. So can you and I know you studied a little bit of Italian saber, right? So can you kind of go a little bit more into these blade actions and, you know, what you like to do and kind of what you've gathered from this system that are cool blade actions that you necessarily weren't exposed to in Italian, if any?
Sure. From what I remember in Italian saber, there was transports, and there was beats and expulsions. Am I missing any?
You might be, but you are. I don't remember them. Those are the big ones I remember: was beats, transports, and expulsions.
And yeah, so I was taught them, but I was never taught like the tactical either reason behind them or when to deploy them. Whereas in learning broadsword, it's pretty clear when to use them, which is and it's built into the curriculum. So let's see. So it's got the normal, beat and then attack. You can do the glazade is kind of like I said, a glide cut. And you can kind of do that wherever you have contact with their sword, whether it's on the inside or the outside. And the idea is to in one tempo cut kind of along and through their blade in order to maintain control while you're attacking. There's a thing similar to an expulsion. It's called a whirl, where kind of no matter where you get contact, if you then turn your guard like 180 degrees with maintaining contact, and then sort of shooting your point towards their strong, it'll create this sort of motion that wants to rip the sword out of their hand.
Okay.
and that'll give you a tempo to attack in.
I've experienced that in foil. Someone did that to me and my foil went that way.
Yeah, that's really fun. It can hurt though, so I try not to do that to people I like.
Fair enough.
Um, what else? Oh, bearing is really fun. And so that's a 2-tempo action where instead of trying to get through their sword with a glide with 1 tempo, you sort of it reminds me a lot of rapier, where you step in and get contact with their sword and sort of push it offline. And because you're positively pushing and also crossing their sword at a right angle, they can't easily disengage. And then once you're in close with that control, you come off the sword to cut and then try and get out before they hit you.
So I'm hearing a lot of emphasis on engagements and, kind of feeling you want that, the Italians call it sentimento di ferro if you're a fiorist, right? The feel of their sword, right? So I guess, is the fencing conversation happening at what kind of range here? Because I'm assuming this is not a lunge and recover system.
This style, the regimental style, is lunge and recover.
Okay.
Earlier styles get more medieval with the passing footworks and triangle step and stuff like that.
Okay.
So regimental style kind of happened after the subjugation of the Highlands. And this is sort of like the Britishization of Scottish fencing. So it kind of gets blended with more English and French fencing with the lunge and recover system. But as far as distance, I say it's probably a little bit closer than a lot of saber systems. Your sword wants to be at like a 45-degree forward and then 45-degree crossed across the center line from the outside to the inside. And then the swords end up touching around the center of percussion. And that's like your kind of neutral bind, where a lot of things happen from there. And so if both you and your opponent are in outside guard, you're covering your outside, your sword is sloped towards your inside, and it's crossed with their outside guard. So the sword is kind of like the swords are meeting in the middle between you. And the main action from there happens by cutover, whether that's a feint or if you're doing a blade action, you can just go straight down the middle.
Gotcha. So and for people trying to kind of compare, right? Outside guard, inside guard. When I think of British fencing and I think broadsword, I also think Roworth, right? So are we thinking of a similar kind of parry system like that, or is this something going to be a little bit different?
Yeah, Roworth is very similar. I think he talks about broadsword or backswords and spadroons and stuff like that too. So Roworth is one of the sources that this kind of meta system is drawn from.
And so this is basically to kind of try and reword it. This is like an amalgamation of several different sources that are sort of being presented to try and make a more complete fencing and tactical system then.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Earlier you mentioned closing in. Does that mean the system has like arm grab / hand grab, so even grappling and throws? So what does it have?
Yeah, there's not a lot of like body to body wrestling, but there's a lot of actions where you close in with your offhand and either push or grab or lift your opponent's sword in order to gain a tempo to attack. There's also like arm wraps where you get total control over their sword arm, and then you can sort of the way that the curriculum kind of presents it in that section is that if you're fighting somebody from down the road, you don't want to necessarily kill them in order to not start a blood feud with your neighbors. So you do a command in order to give them a chance to reevaluate their choices in life.
Okay, cool. What period are these sources? Because a lot of later sources, like late 19th century, say don't grapple. That's not nice. So what period are these sources from?
I believe like 17th and 18th century is when most of these ones are from. And a lot of them are battlefield systems like the like I know Roearth is for sure a battlefield system. So I think it's sort of whatever you can do to defend yourself.
Don't get killed,
Yep,
basically.
don't get
Yeah, fair enough.
killed. Give me 1 sec here.
Parries and binds are nice, shockingly.
Really?
So another question I had was, because this blows my mind because it's like the opposite of what I'm always told in the Italian system, right? Is always lead with the tip, right? The tip always leads first in your parries, in your thrusts, in your cuts, right? The sword is always in front of you and going. So as someone who fenced, Italian saber previously, was it really, really different having to now lead with the strong / basket? Like, did that change things fundamentally for you?
Yeah, it introduces some interesting timing with when you need to move everything. For example, if you're just gonna do a lunge cut, instead of kind of reaching out with a point, you want to get your arm all the way extended, and then lunge with your feet, and then you squeeze your hand, and hopefully everything lands when you land your foot. And the effect that has with the basket is it just sort of acts as a snowplow to get everything out of your way as you attack.
Gotcha.
And you don't have to. I think I would say not every attack ends up being like that, but that ends up being very advantageous in certain situations, especially if you have control of their sword.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Let's see. Another situation where it comes up is parrying. Inside outside parries are sort of can be very similar to saber, but you can also, if you get the angle right, you can leave your hand sort of further extended, and the basket will protect like a pretty large portion of your forearm as well. And it's kind of like parrying while stepping in, where you gain their sword sort of before they've developed their full attack. And if you get them in your strong, you can still use the blade to cut around and hit them. So that's like a second situation where the basket comes in handy. But you wanted me to elaborate on how the basket is used sort of offensively, right?
Yeah, well, you're talking about that snowplow effect. You said it was occasionally very handy. So the circumstances of that.
Yeah, so it happens a lot during the glazade, which I talked about earlier. Let's see, the other way it's useful is when you're cutting around, you're starting off in that cross position, and then you're sort of cutting around on the other side of their sword. And if you keep the basket low and the tip just low enough so that your center of percussion can reach their face, you can cover the line with the basket kind of against any riposte that they might do from the side that they're on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for a straight blade that does. So is your arm going to generally be more extended or less extended when you play broadsword? What does the system want you doing? An inside guard here is very different than an inside guard here, especially when you're looking at pre-Napoleonic, when some folks really are sticking guard and or basket, and sometimes the blade's straight up. So what does your guard look like when you're setting these things up, going for the bind, in terms of how long your arm is?
Yeah. So it's definitely less extended than the later Italian fencing that I learned. your forearm sort of needs to be horizontal to the ground, and probably at least like a hand's width between your elbow and your body. You really don't want to hold your sword back, which is, I mean, it's just good practice anyway. Sort of because you have the basket, you are able to hold your hand out further safely. So it's not really like a retracted hand system, I would say. It's more of an extended hand system. But not fully extended, just because the basket is heavy and it's hard to hold it out that far.
Cool. Francois, what do you got?
How do you deal with since you say your arm is extended that way? In my French system, essentially, what we have is the hilt of a saber is much more open than, say, a basket hilt broadsword, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what you can do is you can hold it out with your point very forward, and that you can cover, say you're in tierce or carte, you can cover a line and close it, have your entire forearm, your entire arm behind the guard. I'm guessing since that the grip that will force you can still kind of handshake it, but you'll still have that restriction in the back that will make your blade go not quite in line with the forearm. How do you position your blade with that to deal with closing those lines?
So you're talking about like having it be harder to be point in line because of the basket?
That's been my experience when I've tried it thus far. I'm kind of curious how you like to deal, especially with that when you're just standing on guard in guard.
So I think you came in after the points are generally a bit more raised than in the style you're talking about, because you have your tip pretty forward, right?
Yes.
So if you're in a hanging guard in broadsword, your point is pretty sloped downward. And if you're in a inside outside guard, which are the normal engaging guards, your point is sort of at a 45-degree forward and to the middle. So I think because the basket is so protective, you don't need to hide behind the top dish of the basket. Like a lot of sabers have a more complete top dish guard, and then they'll have like a less covering knuckle bow or other stuff going on. Whereas the broadsword has sort of protection from all sides, so you don't need to point the sword as much to get as much protection. And as far as the issue you're talking about with like pointing the sword and point in line, I tend to hold, if I want to do point actions, I tend to hold my basket like it's a small sword.
Oh.
With the thumb on the side. And then I basically just do small sword fencing with the broadsword if I want to do point play. And it's not too far from my regular handshake grip when I'm doing, cuts.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's pretty easy to transition back and forth. And you can't get a perfect point in line, but I generally don't want to point my sword right down my forearm. I want to have a little bit of an angle, because that will it'll help me aim, and it'll help me clear their sword out of the way when I'm attacking as well. Because if you have like a perfect point down your kind of in line with your arm, you can't close the line as effectively. You can't push a point offline as you attack.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions?
Do your sources tell you why you have this big hilt? Because most saber systems don't have that huge of a hilt. So is there a reason why they specifically chose for this big? In case
I don't think the sources have anything to say about that, but I know basket hilts have been around for a long time. There was, the Schiavona back in the Renaissance was one of the earlier basket hilts I know about, and basket hilted swords appear in England or in the British Isles generally all the way back in like Elizabethan times and earlier. So I think it's just a form of sword that hung out a long time, maybe longer than it did elsewhere in England, because it's sort of a backwater culturally as far as sword fighting goes.
Okay, cool. I didn't know much about the fully hilted things, so that's why I asked.
Yeah. Eventually I'd like to work back towards George Silver, who was a fencing master from Elizabethan times. Because I think his vocabulary for describing fencing is like really interesting and advanced. The longsword class at my club ends up using a lot of his terms for timing and distance, just because they're so useful.
Oh, good. I had one of those brain farts where you have a question and then you completely forget what you were talking about. That's cool. Oh, so a couple of things. The first thing that I usually get asked when people are like, I want to do broadsword, they then get the problem of, well, where the heck do I find one that isn't $9 billion, right? So as someone who practices it, what are people's options when they want to fence broadsword?
It is a problem just because the hilt is complicated to make, and it takes more time and money. The sword I've been showing off is the basket is from Fabri Armorum in the Czech Republic, and the blade is like a steel from here in the US. And it took me about a year to get all those parts together in the same place and fitted right to get it working. But as far as like off the shelf, the two best places to get it in the United States are Castile has a economy broadsword, which is pretty good. I have one, and I would say that the balance is not quite fully basket hilt balanced. It's more tip heavy like a saber. But it's nice and light. It's fun to fence with, and it's got plenty of protection. I did just order a new basket hilt from Alchem Swords in Ohio, and they're slightly cheaper than Castile. I have ordered a dagger from them previously, and the build quality seems pretty good, but I haven't gotten that basket hilt yet.
And this kind of segues into my next question, which is, in HEMA and fencing in general, if you don't want to identify as being in HEMA, for those viewers who are vehemently not in HEMA, for people who swing swords at each other, right? Sometimes there's this battle between, is this an accurate representation of what people were fencing with or swinging at each other historically and what we can get today? Have you had a chance to handle some historical or at least good replicas of these baskets? And can you say whether or not the tools you have to fence with are accurate, and whether any considerations you have to take when fencing with them?
I have had a chance to handle an antique broadsword. I'm blanking on his name right now, but the guy who runs Davonreach down in Santa Clara brought some antique examples to a tournament I was at, and I was very happy to find out that the one I had built was pretty close in handling to the historical example. It was interesting because the blade is so thin that even though it's kind of wide, it's not very heavy. And the extra material down at the basket means that it's balanced about an inch or two from the guard, which makes the tip very nimble. Unlike a lot of sabers where the balance is further down the blade, you kind of have to work with the momentum. This particular example, I know there's like a huge range of different swords, so you can't say for sure any sort of blanket statement, but this particular one felt really nimble in the tip, and it felt like I could definitely do all the actions I had been learning with it.
And that's sort of interesting too, because there's always this big stereotype with basket-hilted broadswords, right? That they're very large, clumsy weapons, whereas there's still apparently some finesse to it.
Yeah, there's a lot of finesse. I would liken it to how rapiers are heavy but nimble. Because the balance is more towards the hilt, it frees up the blade for quicker actions.
Okay, so my question is, how much, let's say, hand sniping, or better said, forearm sniping, arm sniping, or manchette play is there in Broadsword, because the basket is so big. Can you get even behind that, or
Oh
is
yeah,
that
you
a
can.
thing? Oh.
I think it has to do with the angle your arm ends up at with that kind of crossed in the middle bind. Like especially if you're on inside guard, it opens up the outside of your forearm a lot. And with the quick cutovers you can do, it's really fun to just like kind of pick up your blade and drop it on their forearm. And as I was saying earlier, with kind of switching to small sword grip, you can also do nice point actions to the part of the wrist that's exposed with your tip. So there's a lot. I feel like there's actually a lot of advanced target stuff that happens with broadsword. At least the way I play, because I mean that's how I fence generally. Just to sort of harass my opponent in the arm until they open up, and then you can go for the deeper targets.
That raises an interesting question. We know that a number of the broadsword players also advocated the small sword. So have you found the two to naturally hybridize, or have you simply been able to take advantage of the fact that you've got that prior training and it does make a difference for you?
I'm sure it's a combination of both, but I feel like because the main swords in this era were broadsword, saber, spadroon, and smallsword, they all kind of fence very similarly. And I've really enjoyed listening to the all you folks talking about the like multi-weapon systems, especially like the French systems. That really got me excited, and it made me start thinking more about teaching, because I really love smallsword and I want to teach kind of smallsword together with broadsword. And as you can tell, I love smallsword, and so talking about my smallsword grip on my broadsword, I think it's really complementary. It helps train those point actions, and if you can go back and forth between the cut and the point play, I think it's really versatile and effective.
Cool. Marcus, you were first.
Okay, so representing Hungary gang, how much do you do with the back edge? Because the broadsword has a very long back edge. Do you do anything with that?
Not as much as I should. I think the main thing that I do is back edge beats, but that's not really using the back edge to attack with. My main problem with trying to do back edge cuts is it's hard to with the basket. It's hard to like do reverse attacks with it. It kind of wants to go forward, but I have pulled off some good reverse edge like rising cuts to the arm. Those go really fast because of the nimbleness of the tip. But now that you say that, I kind of want to figure out some more stuff to do with it. I really like the stuff I've seen from Russ's videos of the like hooking onto around the wrist with the back edge. That stuff is really cool.
Back edge stuff is really, really cool and really fun.
Any other questions?
For me, I'm very happy to mention the French system in some ways, because basically a lot of the very early swords that get associated with Espadon first are very similar to basket hilts. Some of the very early Walloon hilt ones, you've got the two shells, right? But it didn't have all these ligaments around the guard, and it was like sometimes I wonder how much of how similar early Espadon might have been to what we see in Broadsword, because we just don't have that material in France, whereas you guys have it, and I'm a bit jealous. I
There-
wish I could. I wish I could have that view further back.
Well, there's definitely a historical connection between Scotland and France during the Jacobite uprisings. So I'm sure, fencers went back and forth learning from each other.
Oh man, exchanging with the people from the Cateran Society at the Glengarry Highland Games, from my perspective as a French fencer when I went there, that was really valuable to me because I noticed, there's a lot of things that are like way more similar than I thought there were, and I think that kind of happened on both ends, and that was a pleasant experience for me. I also wanted to say, going back very briefly to broadswords and ways to assemble them, I think you can also buy a basket from Hanoi. You can buy I think they're sharp and broadsword, and then put a gas steel blade in there.
Yeah,
That's what I used there. So
yeah. My only problem with that is that you have to buy a whole sword and then another practice blade. So
yeah,
it's not any cheaper really than. I mean, then you do have a sharp blade to play with if you want, but
you can do some test cutting.
yeah, it's just it hasn't been solved yet. It's still a problem.
Fair enough. That's it for me. It's just those little things. Sorry.
Yeah, I was really I had fun listening to the talk you folks did about the combined French systems.
Thank you very much.
For the love of God, don't keep complimenting the French, otherwise Francois will never be able to get rid of him. I think he's going to have another French presentation soon, actually, on Joinville, so that will be cool. You mentioned George Silver, and so I'm sure like someone from the dark parts of the internet is going to rise up and have some sort of very vehement opinion about this. So we'll have to do this. So right, I think Silver.
I'd love to get into it.
So no, I dislike Silver. I'll say that off the bat, but I think he has a lot of really good points for his time, which is he actually tries to define tempo, which to his credit, like I use that sniff test all the time, right? Time of the arm, time of the, what is it, arm, hand, and foot.
Time of the hand, time of the body, time of the feet.
Like that's actually that's really good stuff. If you take the whole I really, really, really hate Italians part out. But I have to ask, right? Mixed weapons. Have you done the classic Silver matchup of rapier v broadsword and or even versus a saber? How have you found this system?
I have done. My club sort of tries to do a lot of mixed weapon stuff. Just I think it's a really good sort of way to show you what the strengths and weaknesses of the sword you're practicing are. And I've done a lot of mixed weapon stuff with the broadsword as well. So I've done against longsword. I've done against rapier. Let's see what else. I think I've done saber as well. So against rapier specifically, you really have to get past the point and get control of the point, and the broadsword's pretty good at getting control of another sword. And once you're past the point, it's kind of your game, but getting there is the hard part because the rapier can disengage so quickly that's sort of the first challenge is getting past the danger zone.
And that was one of the things with me just reading his manual is like, man, I do not want this matchup. Like having done saber v rapier, if it's a good rapier, it's horrifying. Like I get shanked 9 times out of 10. But that's cool. I think mixed weapon is really, really important. And hell, I mean, some of your manuals like Silver are literally for the mixed weapon game.
Yeah.
Which I think is cool.
Silver has, I like his commentaries. I haven't tried to apply his system in fencing. It seems like just kind of a collection of good advice that would be difficult to assemble into a working system. But I mean, people have done it. The Staccata down in Australia seems to have a pretty robust, and from what I can tell from their videos, pretty functional George Silver fencing system. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, that's all I had. I was gonna yield to Russ.
Oh, I have such a long history with silver. So I'm a Hema dinosaur. We've been arguing about silver for a very, very long time. And if you discount the Grobian nature of the discourse, oh, I got to define that. Okay, for those of you who don't do early modern studies, there's a reason that a lot of the Elizabethan era stuff sounds just so awful. And the style was called Grobian, and it was literally like you took 4chan but tried to make it an art form. So it was a counter response to Renaissance styles of writing or early Renaissance styles of writing. And you see it everywhere, from very low figures to really lofty ones like Erasmus, where they are intentionally writing in the ugliest style possible, because that was just the style of the era. That aside, I'm a big fanboy of Silver's terminology and method, and have died on that hill several times. Also have things to say about the rapier and that particular argument that got me disowned in HEMA 20 some years ago in certain pro-silver crowds, which is a huge aside, but it does lead to my bigger next question is, when would a Cateran Society person, since we don't know your tracks, get involved in either extracurriculars as part of the study or as part of the regular course? So you mentioned that you are on an early track that starts with the regimental. We don't know how the rest of your body of study progresses. Can you talk to us about that?
I can go over that. It sort of starts in the most recent broadsword fencing and then goes backward into the past. So the next level is called old style, and that's more of the like stage gladiator. There's I suppose I have to explain that. In England, there would just be people who would fight each other on stage with broadswords and other various weapons. And so that style starts to look more medieval, with the footwork mainly, because it's more of a passing step type system, where if you're going to attack, you're going to go from one foot to the other, pass in and then pass back out of range. And so that's why I say it starts to look more like what George Silver is talking about back in the Renaissance, or sorry, in the Elizabethan era. So that's from there, you get into sort of accessory weapons like broadsword and alehouse dagger, broadsword and targe. Sorry, my dog is getting excited. I think that's mostly it. It's sort of like taking the foundation of the single sword and adding either a dagger or a shield. It's kind of the main thrust of the progression.
Was there one? Sorry, Russ. I just, this is a burning question for me. Wasn't there one where it was bayonet and basket, or bayonet and something?
Yeah. So a bayonet system is not part of the Cateran curriculum, but I have seen people play around with that, where they get bayonet versus single sword or bayonet versus sword and targe.
No, I mean like the bayonet was in. I thought I saw a video where y'all were doing bayonet in the offhand and a basket in the other.
Oh, that might have been Heiko. He likes to play around with different stuff.
Okay.
I think that's more of like I think it might have been like cutlass and carbine. And there's like some sort of, I forget specifically where it's from, but I feel like it might have been a World War I or II era thing.
That's a Dutch colony, Southeast Asian thing.
Yeah. Where they would use the rifle as like a parrying stick along with a cutlass.
Gotcha.
That's outside the Cateran system, though, as far as the curriculum.
Gotcha. I just always, I love odd things and offhands. Sorry, Russ. I had to.
No. I don't blame you at all. I mean, someday we'll play Saber and I'll put a mace in my offhand and you could enjoy how the game suddenly becomes much simpler.
Very Skyrim of you.
Do you ever use the Fokosh in your offhand? That seems pretty interesting.
There are Renaissance era short-handled Fokosh that people would tuck into their belt, and
Nice.
we have indications that those were sometimes used as offhand weapons. It just depends on what's going on. That's the glory of a folk weapon. So
Yep.
you have a huge variety in your practice there. All right, so here's the $1 million question. What's super cool about training with the Cateran Society and the broadswords and the mixed weapon stuff Cateran does? Give us your elevator speech for this is really super cool and people should do it, and why.
Well, I think broadsword is just a really fun weapon. It's really nimble and skill focused more than people would think. The Cateran Society has been a really good training tool for me. You can kind of go at your own pace. Basically, you get in contact with them on their website or on Facebook or wherever you can find them, and somebody will assign a mentor to you, and you go through their curriculum and you film videos of yourself and you get feedback. And hopefully it works a lot better if you can get another training partner to work with. I've been working with Corey and my friend John. And you just get feedback on your different training report videos. And it's nice to be able to study something at your own pace.
Cool. Okay, everybody, last chance to beat up on Finn. What's your hardest questions you've got for him?
That's
It
pretty
appears
much
you may
all
have
I had.
stumped and amazed them.
I think if you're coming from Saber, it's a really easy system to learn. The two are very similar, but the differences are different enough to be interesting, I think.
I can 10-10 that from having played with a lot of earlier historical sabers. We do have cavalry sabers that are up in the 2 kilogram range, and they handle sometimes very similar to a basket hilt or a schiavona, and sometimes very, very differently. But it is a lot of fun to have to shift your mindset from, this tool says go this way, and this tool says the other. And I was really glad that you mentioned just how thin a lot of these blades are, because you look at them in a 2-dimensional profiled picture and you would think it was just a boat anchor. But
Right.
I've handled schiavona and basket hilted broadswords that were easily more handy than issue sabers from the mid-19th century. Much, much faster in the hand. So it really blows that stereotype out. It's really worth cross-training with.
Yeah, I mean they're cutting swords. They're not trying to deal with armor, so they can be pretty thin in their distal taper.
Yep. All right. I've done last call, second to last call. Thank you very much for joining us. We will get this online. Please do me a favor and shoot me any links you've got that I can go ahead and put in the post so people can hunt you down and tell you how wrong you were about silver, because fair warning, that's coming.
Yeah, I know.
We want the hate clicks.
All right, thank you so much for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
All right. And next up, we will be talking to Chris Holtzman about Radaelian Saber. And after that, Francois is going to bring us home, at least in this part of the series, for School of Joinville and what's weird about it. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Beasley.
Thank you.
We've got more videos and content coming, so if you liked what you saw and it was useful for you, please stab the like button, /subscribe, and punch the little bell icon so that you're notified immediately when new content comes available. Thanks, and go do the thing.